So happy to be here today to talk with Allison and Caress about shame and blame. Definitely topics that are not always that easy to talk about, but incredibly important. So because we're going to be talking about topics that are sometimes a little bit challenging, I thought it would just be nice to take a moment to land and all just be fully present in our bodies. Just inviting you to take a position that's erect and upright. Gently closing your eyes if that feels appropriate. And just feeling yourself supported by the earth, whether you're standing or sitting. Just feeling the contact with the floor. Just arriving fully in your body. Perhaps doing just a little inventory of what is present for you in terms of thoughts, body sensations, emotions. Just noticing what you're arriving with here in this moment. And just taking a couple of deep breaths. And gently opening your eyes and coming back to join us for this discussion. I'm Lois Shannon, and I am the founder of the Women's Network, which is really a network dedicated to recreating, I like to say, the thriving sisterhood of happy, healthy, holy women. I think we've become a little bit fragmented or disconnected from ourselves and our sisters, and so we're creating a platform where we can come together to talk about topics like we're going to discuss today and really generate some awareness for some of the challenges and things that we face as women, and then have a place where we can also have access to all of the amazing tools and techniques and healing modalities that are available to us today. I always feel like, if my mother had only had access to the things that we now know and that are available for us to heal and thrive as women in this in the 21st century. So Kenya, do you want to just do a quick intro and then we'll kind of go around and do some quick intros?
That sounds great. So my name is Kenya Brading, and I am working on the Women's Network with Lois. And it's been such an amazing journey since I joined, and I think I've really noticed how much I've stepped more and more into my own self-responsibility, which I think really lies on the other side of blame. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation because I definitely feel like I used to blame a lot of other people for a lot of my problems, and really my life only started to change when I changed that perspective. So thank you both for being here.
So hi everyone, I'm Allison Litchfield, and I live here in Boulder. I've lived here for 25 years, and I came to Boulder originally just after losing my mom to cancer, and just got on the path. And I feel like this is such a hot topic for me, and it's been something I've been exploring in my own healing process for many years, and I'm really excited to share it, especially with Caress. I feel like we've shared a lot of similarities on our path, and so I'm just really happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, and I'm Caress, but I like to be called C because I think that's just a lot easier to remember. And I love the topic of blame and shame. I do behavioral kinesiology, I do spiritual response therapy, and ancestral healing. And for me, I've grown up with a lot of blame and shame. And it is a very uncomfortable topic, but I think it's very necessary for our healing. I realize working one-on-one and workshops that all our worth issues, all our core values, it all comes down to how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about the world. And we're either, and it's funny, I have to share this, but my husband is always reminding me, we've been together for 23 years, maybe 21. He always says we're either trying to get away from pain or we're trying to enjoy pleasure. And then with blame and shame, I think what happens with us is we're living in pain and not having any pleasure. So this whole, this whole topic on blame and shame is truly important for us, especially as women.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're going right in the heart of the matter. Do you guys want to just share a little bit about the work that you're doing and the workshops and how you came to be focused on blame and shame? Because there's a little bit of a story of how that happened.
Okay, I'll start. So my field of work is an embodiment. I'm a golfer and I'm also a yoga instructor. And so I really work the embodiment energy and how energy gets stuck in our bodies, and how to work through those blockages through movement, through releasing, blockages in the body. And I've been the last probably 3 or 4 years particularly focused on working with women because it's my, I think we're always kind of working on where we're at. And I had a lot of work and healing to do around feminine. And so that's where I've been marinating in the last 3 years with yoga. I do a lot of workshops and immersions with women. I'm about to start a teacher training for women, which is, it's called Embody Shakti. And so it's really about how do we fully embody our feminine power and at the same time, release those things that aren't serving us. Shame and blame are energies that we actually can get stuck inside of, and we don't even know we're there. It almost becomes like a second skin. So it's really important to explore it in the body because sometimes it's like a feeling of frozenness that you don't even know you're inside of. So that's where I had to work in my body mostly, and where I freeze up and just bringing awareness and opening to those energies. So
Great.
That's where I'm at.
Right. And so Allison and I, we met, I want to say like in the beginning of spring, and we realized how in alignment our work is because I'm a behavioral kinesiologist, and a lot of that is muscle testing. So when we're muscle testing, my teacher always said this, our mouths lie, but our bodies don't. And so our worth issues, our blame, our shame is stuck. But usually it's stuck here in our hearts. And when it's stuck in our hearts, it affects our whole body. It affects our thoughts. It affects every aspect of our life. And so when we started talking about how do we claim our sovereignty, how do we take back our power, well, the first step is get out of our shame. Again, getting back into the aspect of kinesiology and not the consciousness. Unfortunately, shame is at the very bottom.
I can't hear you totally. Unfortunately, shame, sorry?
At the very bottom of the map of consciousness.
Yeah.
The very top is enlightenment. Yeah. And so for us, just at least get out of our shame.
Yeah.
Even if we step into fear mode, guess what? We stepped out.
Right.
We can keep forward. So that's the whole aspect of why we decided to start working together, start doing workshops. The workshops we're going to be doing is incorporating spirituality, mindfulness. It's going to also incorporate embodiment and moving all that energy out. And we're also adding the aspect of nature. So we'll be doing workshops in Costa Rica and the OSA, and really grounding on how we can fully feel alive in our sovereignty, in our power here on earth, and fully be grounded in that.
Yeah.
So
I think
we need to work together.
I think it does come back to worth. I think that was the word that you just used. But so why do we go into blame mode?
I can only speak for myself, but I think the reason why I go into blame mode, I think it's a natural defense mechanism. Because I think for me, I know when I've gone into blame mode, it's because I want to avoid the pain of taking on the responsibility that it could be my fault. It's a lot easier to point the finger then really reflect on yourself and really look and work on myself. And I think that's why we, as women and as men, can go into blame mode.
And I think part of it is that we've been conditioned to look outside of ourselves. We were not really conditioned to be able to observe ourselves and understand what our piece is in the relationship. So I think there's a lot of conditioning behind it too.
I think that conditioning is our defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's our natural response first. It's not to take on that responsibility.
Mm.
Right.
So we're trying to move into is be responsible. Instead of thinking of who's the responsible party, well, I'm a responsible person. So I think that's the shift.
And so how do you work? Because I love that everything you're saying about the body. I think it's absolutely true that our mind can tell us all kinds of things. And that's, I think, where the conditioning is too, that we believe that the other person really is at fault. and our bodies tell us something else. So how do you work with people who are in blame mode? Like, are there tools or techniques that you work with to help them be able to observe more themselves?
I can get into the mindful aspect of it, the mindfulness aspect, if you want to share the embodiment aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think in working with the body, we have to retrain ourselves to listen, because we're actually not used to listening to our body, which is sensations, it's emotion, it's also thought, right? But I think one thing we've forgotten is how to feel, and that's like, for me, been my biggest work around shame is like allowing myself just to feel the energy instead of like push it away. Because as soon as you push away the feeling, that's when actually I think shame and blame grow, because you're not being responsible in your body, really. So the first thing for me has been to learn how to just stop what I'm doing when I'm in those places of wanting to throw out the blame to someone else, to stop and actually just take a breath and notice where in my body I'm projecting energy out to someone else instead of taking it in. Because when we do that, then we actually start to empower ourselves through the willingness to be able to feel. And I think that's where it's like the first thing is being able to feel vulnerable. And I'll speak from my own experience. It's been the hardest thing in the world for me to just allow myself to be vulnerable. But when I do go to those places, it's such a relief. It's almost like this part of me that says, like, you can be a failure. You don't have to be perfect. And there's some great relief in that. Like, wow, what would it actually be like just to be a failure? And just to be in that energy of like, I don't have to try so hard, right? And there's a vulnerability in it. And there's such a beauty in it as well. So in the body, it's about learning how to feel again. And that's not easy. We're not used to doing that. So we have to not recondition, but learn how to do that. I do it through yoga and different practices of meditation and breathing practices. There's many ways, and Chris has some amazing tools for that as well.
Well, for me, it gets into the aspect of mindfulness and reflection. And when I say mindfulness, it's literally just asking yourself some questions. When we go into blame mode, I think these are some very important questions to ask. To be a responsible person, you have to look at your part and your role in that relationship, in that creation, why things fell apart. So the first thing I have to ask myself is, did I really speak my truth? Was I really being honest? Did I really communicate as well as I could have? Or did I hold back? And that's a big thing, because are we willing to really get uncomfortable and speak our truth? That's a really uncomfortable place.
I was going to say, I think there's a lot about living with being uncomfortable. We live in a society where comfort is the norm, right? That we always want to be comfortable, and we can make ourselves comfortable. And going into some of this, as you've said, is really going into the discomfort and feeling that we don't necessarily want to feel.
Right. This really beautiful comment on the side here, just saying that, that perfectionism kind of comes into play here. And I think we feel like if we could only just be perfect and we could sort of hide all of the shame that we have underneath and all this blame that we have, then, you know, somehow we'll be accepted by everyone else. And so I think the perfectionism really plays into that. And two, like if we feel like we're being perfect, then that's very comfortable. So like you're saying, sitting with the discomfort and going, okay, I'm not perfect, but I am in my wholeness if I can just embrace the simple fact that I don't have to be ashamed of who I am and accept myself.
Absolutely.
And just to add to that real quick, I've been looking a lot at like, what am I trying to be accepted into anyway? Like, what is it that we're trying to be accepted into? Because what we're trying to be accepted into, I don't think is what we even want to be accepted into, you know, at the root of it.
Yeah.
I think that's actually really important, Allison, is that the sisterhood, that's why we started focusing on the sisterhood, is that we do live in systems, right? We live in our family system and in our cultural system, and our sisterhood is a system. And so we belong to systems. That's how humans survive, right? We have to behave in certain ways and have certain beliefs to belong. And if we don't belong, then we're really at risk. And I think a lot of the shame comes up because there's this perspective that everybody else has it together, you know, that everyone else is doing fine, that they don't have the stories that we have. And I know for me personally, that was a lot of my life, was really defending against anyone ever knowing the real me, the real person who suffered so much. And I put on this real face to the outside of perfectionism and everything was okay and defending myself. And I think we're coming into this time where there's an opportunity for us to all come clean and just look at each other. You know? Like, why are we all suffering with shame when we could all just look at each other and say, we've all got a story, you know, we all have a story.
Yeah, we do.
And
so,
yeah, and then we have a different system and a different way of being with each other as opposed to trying to cover it all up. Because shame for me is definitely that feeling of I'm not right. Like there's something wrong with me and I don't belong. And I think there's been some myths about what belonging is. You just said, Allison, what does belonging really mean? Like what's the game we're all playing?
The book that I'm reading right now, Women Who Run with the Wolves, there's a beautiful, she goes into all of these different myths and explains about the wild woman archetype. And one of the stories is about the ugly duckling, which is the duckling that feels like it doesn't belong. It looks different, it acts different, and it's so desperately trying to belong that it just keeps messing up. And it has to go on this really difficult journey until it can find out that actually it's a beautiful swan. It just had to blossom and become that beautiful swan over time. And I think that's such a great analogy for belonging, because I feel like so many of us feel like we somehow don't belong. And like you were saying, Allison, it's like we're trying to be accepted into something that maybe we don't even need to be accepted to, that there's some other group or some other sisterhood or some other community that actually serves us better.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think the ultimate thing that we're being asked to do is belong to ourselves. Right. You know, to come home to who we are in our essence. And that's the ultimate place of home, right?
Right.
I think what we have to understand is that shame, it's not our identity. It's not who we are. It's not our truth. It's just our experience in the moment. It's just our process in the moment. And not to claim that as our identity. That I think we do that as women. And I think the reason why is because we go into our relationship, we go into our creations without setting the proper boundaries. I know I don't, like I go in full force and I have expectations sometimes. And that's why I go into blame mode, because I have expectations, but I didn't hear what those expectations were. And then I have the assumption that I'm going to give 100%, I'm going to give it all. And I'm assuming the other party is going to do the same thing. And that's when I become reactionary. That's when I go into blame mode. And then when that's gone, then I go into shame mode because I wasn't my authentic self. I wasn't being truthful of what I wanted. And I think as women, sometimes what we first have to look into is what is it we really want? And what is keeping us from creating what we want and taking back our power and our sovereignty? And It's just all these mindfulness questions to ask ourselves. Maybe we ask these questions and we set up the guidelines of how we want our relationships to be, how we want our creations to be. Set down our boundaries, really speak our truth. You know, what are our expectations? Are they too much? Are we making too many assumptions? And that's just some really, you know, like just really reflect.
Right.
And it forces us to really think about, wow, you know, I'm a responsible person. Well, how am I going to respond? How am I going to do things from now on? And how do I not take on the idea that I'm perfect? You know what? None of us, I think I heard someone say recently, we're not getting out of this alive with a clean slate. We're not. I know I'm not. I'm not a perfect person at all. And I think that's why we go into wearing masks, because we think we're not enough.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I was wondering if you run into this with the workshops and the work that you do with women, because I definitely see it in some of the offerings that we have around permission to pause. So we've set up permission to pause evenings, and we're doing an app to give women permission to pause, because we're also in a little bit of a vicious cycle. That if we don't really feel worthy, and we don't know our truth, and we don't know who we are, that we also don't feel worthy of taking the time to sit and ask the reflective questions and really get in touch with ourselves so that we can feel empowered. And I think that's what's interesting, is how do we break that cycle? You know, how do we give ourselves, how do we feel worthy enough to give ourselves permission to stop and ask the questions so that we can live a different way? Do you guys have that experience at all with women?
Absolutely, all the time, myself included. And, you know, the space that we're sitting in right now is in my home, and I call it the Lakshmi Temple. And when I first heard the teachings of this Hindu goddess Lakshmi, I was transformed, because her whole teaching is about finding our worthiness in our vulnerabilities and in our wounds, and the places that scare us, the places where we don't feel enough. If we're willing to go in and keep going in and find that resource within, that's where it's actually the vulnerability that allows us to open into our true authentic self. And for me, that's been, you know, I've hidden all my life. And a lot of, you know, I've gotten feedback of like not feeling like people think I'm authentic. And I even have blame and shame around that, because I'm like, well, I'm not showing my authentic self, but there's like it's like there's a wall there for me. And so when I was able to drop into like feeling again, and for me, it's a kinesthetic experience of feeling my worth in my body, and in my body in relationship to my environment and other people, which I think is what embodiment is. And I've come out of this, and I think there's this way in which the perfection thing is like trying to strive to be godlike instead of to be human, which is human is about being whole, right? You had mentioned it, Lois, before, like how do we come back to wholeness?
Right.
We're not just divine beings, we're human. So we have both of these things that we're integrating in our lives. And humans are imperfect. We're perfectly imperfect.
Right. We have an indigenous teacher, and there's a word in that tribe, and it basically translates to, in my humanness, I made a mistake. Mm-hmm. And that's for all of us. And I think the workshops, the one-on-ones, I think when I allow myself to be vulnerable in front of my client, it gives them a sense of permission. And what happens there is that's when the authentic connection occurs.
Right.
Because I'm being vulnerable, or they're being vulnerable. At first, there is a major discomfort. It feels awkward, and then it shifts to me too.
Yeah.
Because we all have a sense of weakness. We all are afraid that people are going to find out our secret is we're not perfect, that we're not strong, yet we don't have it all together. And that's when the authentic connection happens. I like to play with that word scared and sacred. So when we're scared to be vulnerable, we're scared to show our true selves. But if we change that seed and move it over, it becomes sacred. that sacred vulnerability, it creates the authentic connection. It allows each and every person in that room to let down their guard and open their heart. And that's when the real healing begins.
Right.
I love that the vulnerability piece is such a huge part of transforming some of this blame and shame. And I'm just curious if you have anything else that you teach or that you feel is important to that transformation process.
Well, because I do a lot of embodiment and I work a lot through yoga, I do a lot of sound healing through mantra and pranayama. I think the breath is key, because what the breath does is if you can learn to breathe into your body, you're right in that moment. I mean, we can almost take a breath right now. It's like you're bringing presence to your body. So when you're in those moments of shame, and shame is such an interesting energy, and I really just discovered it in myself, like what it feels like a couple of years ago. And it almost has this feeling of a second skin, you know, so it's like, it's almost covering you, and you can't necessarily, it's not easy to just break out of it. Like I have to do some kind of a mantra. Sometimes I'll do body movements that are just, you know, like pulling out swords and literally like clearing energies off my body, because it can take over you like a second skin, and it's a very upward frozen energy. So we come up and out of our bodies, and if you can learn to breathe down into your spine, the base of your spine, and into your pelvis, you're going to bring awareness there. And then at least you're not, like C said, you're not identified with it. And I think that's the key to all of the feelings in our body, is like, if we can begin to feel without attaching the story to the feeling, then we're on the right path. And then we're on that path to being able to feel vulnerable without getting stuck. So I think that was, I know, my fear of like, well, if I feel my shame, it's going to get me, and I'm going to go into the dark and I'll never come out, you know? So that, I think, is the key, is to hold that awareness piece as we're feeling all these different places in ourselves that feel scary and uncertain. So mantra, the breath, and we'll do a little bit towards the end of our session together. And then dance is a great way, just throwing on some music, right? And just moving your body, because I think that's the key, is that it can get stuck in our bodies. So,
I think it's so interesting that especially for women, I mean, I think for all of us, we really need to process and be in our bodies. But women, the work that we did when we were, I don't know, cooking or singing or dancing or whatever we did, there were ways that we processed things in our bodies. And I think now that so many of us have desk jobs and have gone into the working world, it really changed a lot for us. And so I think dancing and singing and yoga and all these ways for us to get back in our bodies are critical to addressing.
so true. Yeah.
And for me, I think the key thing and what I've been trained to do is forgiveness work. I think we have to learn.
Caress, can you speak up a little bit? I have a hard time hearing you. So, yeah.
So for me, and the work I'm trained to do is really understanding and being about forgiveness. It all comes down to, first we have to learn to forgive ourselves. We've got to learn to be kinder to ourselves. You know, it's the idea that if we're in blame mode, it's not the idea we're letting them off the hook. It's we're getting ourselves unhooked.
Mm-hmm.
When I say that, I mean, when we're blaming someone, we're in shame mode, we're dwelling on it, we're thinking about it, we're fixating. And what happens is that person or that story, it begins to own us. And when it owns us, you know, it owns our feelings, it owns our emotions, it owns our energy, it owns our attention, it owns our time. And guess what? If we add all that time up, wow, this life is short. So why are we spending all that time fixating and dwelling? So I like to say, when we're dwelling, it becomes where we live. It's our dwelling. Yeah. And that's not where I want to live. So the whole key aspect is, you know, if I'm in blame mode, I'll close my eyes, I'll take a deep breath, and I say, I forgive, whether it's forgiving myself or that person. And with the out breath, and I say, I am now letting go. And it takes practice. I have to say, I forgive myself, I forgive that person, and I'm letting go. And it's just a constant mindfulness. We are forgiving. I am forgiving. I am forgiving. I am forgiving.
Yeah. I think you bring up something really interesting, Chris, that I said to someone the other day, that if I took all the energy that I spent on defending myself, hiding, pretending, blaming, like all of that energy could like change my life, you know? And so when we turn it around and unleash it, like it really is useful to think of it that way, that it's such wasted energy. And that we're spending all this time ruminating on trying to control somebody else, which is never, ever going to be possible. And so it doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve us or the other person. And if we took all that energy, and if all of us took all of our energy and unleashed it for good in the world, we could change the planet. Like, I think about how much wasted energy we have. But we don't have to change one person, right? We can just change the planet for the good with all of our beautiful, passionate energy, right? That we could use. So I think it is really interesting to be able to observe that and understand that every time we're in blame, we're giving away energy that could be used for something else.
Yeah.
We're giving away our power.
Yeah. And one thing I want to just mention is that I know for me in my own practice that I've had to get a real warrior kind of energy to work with my shame. And I think it's really important to do it with, like Chris said, with kindness and compassion. But sometimes it takes a real fierceness. And that wasn't comfortable for me, being like fierce and almost like on the edge of, being that female energy that people, it's like people put down in our society. Like, oh, a woman can't be strong or she's called a certain name. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah.
But to get really fierce with the kindness in your heart of what we're actually doing, not only for ourselves, and I think this is really important, that we're doing personal work, but we're also breaking some of these societal conditions that you talked about, Lois.
Totally.
And so when I feel into like, I'm not just doing this for me, but I'm doing it for the collective, that's where the fierceness comes in. And there's a part of me that's like, no more. Because how long are we gonna choose that? It really is a choice.
Mm.
Really beautiful.
What's just coming to me too is that I think that the shame and the blame really, really closes our hearts. And I've been doing a lot of work recently about opening my heart. And I love what you said, Chris, about forgiveness, because I think the forgiveness opens our heart back up again. And I think that, like you're saying, the culture that we live in is so about separation and comparison and competition. And when we move into that we space and we get really fierce about it and really open our hearts, that's where I feel like so much of the transformation can happen.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so, when in the workshops, that's one thing that we want to do is get beyond the belief systems that vulnerability equals weakness, or that a very strong woman is called a certain thing, that, that we're whole beings. We've got to be every aspect of that. And we have to show not just, ourselves, but I'm a mother. I have to show my daughters. I want to be an example for them. Because if I'm not an example, then who's going to be their example? Yeah. So I have to allow myself that mindfulness practice of, do I want to be, not my truth? Do I want to step back? Do I want to be perceived a certain way? Or do I just say, hey, this is who I am. I'm going to be vulnerable in the moment. I'm going to be strong in whatever. I'm going to be honest about who I am. I'm taking back my power. I'm claiming this is who I am.
That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that we are suffering from systemic issues that for so many thousands of years, the women have not been feeling that we were enough or that we were equal, and so that's and that kept getting handed down, this feeling of unworthiness, that there was something not quite right, that our role was not completely secure or whatever. And I think in particular for me, because I have a daughter too, Caress, that I feel like we're at a time where we need to break that chain. And we do, as women, as difficult as it is to go into our shame and some of these feelings, if we can't learn to weather the storm and feel all of those things, they keep getting handed down because you know that it's in our bodies, right? It's in our bodies even more than it's in our minds.
Right.
And so I think that's the really exciting piece, is that there is systemic change that's happening, that I think we are starting to realize that it isn't who we are, that there isn't something wrong with us, and that we come together and heal that so that we don't keep passing it down.
Exactly. Yeah. I realize when I'm not being proactive, I become passive aggressive. You know, so I have to be mindful. I'm like, I'm being passive aggressive right now. Yeah.
Well, and to be really honest, I think the blame piece is a lot of times that because we're not being honest about what our needs are, so we don't recognize our own need, and then we expect for the other person to meet our needs. And when they don't meet our needs, then we get really pissed off and we start blaming them. But it would have been much easier if we had realized at the very beginning what our needs were. And so that happens a lot with my kids, where I give and I want them to be really happy. And we had this one time where we went out for dinner and I let them order sodas, which I never let them order sodas because I wanted them to have a great night. And then, of course, they started drinking the sodas, and I sat there the whole time going, stop drinking the sodas. You have to eat your meal first. And my son came up to me, he was maybe 12 at the time, and he said, Mom, next time, can you spare us all the experience and just not order the sodas? Because in a way, like, my need was for them to think I was a great mother and be really happy. And then I made a choice, which I wasn't happy with my choice, and I made them wear all of my regret about my choice. And I was needing them to be a certain way in order to meet my own needs. And I think it's really interesting. Like, that's a challenge for us as women, because we haven't been taking the time to sit and be reflective. That many of us, and I will definitely say me, did not have any idea what my needs were. And so then we start trying to meet our needs in a very manipulative, not very nice way, and we get into a lot of blame and shame.
Right.
Yeah, that's so true. It makes me feel so good. I'm not the only mom.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
the stories my children could tell, Allison.
And they totally call you on it, right? You know, my kids totally call me on stuff, and then, you know, I feel like my work in healing as a parent and how I was raised is just forgiveness. You know, to go to them after I've had that energy and just say I'm sorry. You know, and that's a huge awareness.
Yeah.
We're giving our kids.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Allison, do you want to share some of your embodiment practices? Is this?
I was just going to say the same thing. That's great.
Okay, so one of the practices we could do is just a heart meditation, and we'll take a mudra. It's called the lotus mudra. You can join your thumb and pinky and the heels of your hands, and it's almost like you're just holding a lotus right in front of your heart. And then we'll close our eyes and go ahead and just let your energy drop all the way down. So I even feel it in my voice when I let my energy drop down. It gets a little deeper. You can just let your breath go down into your base. Just feeling the two sitting bones on the ground. And allow your sitting bones to yield towards the earth. So the connection of our bodies to the earth is one of the quickest ways that we can come out of blame and shame. Because it roots us deeply into who we are. So then just letting your attention rest in your heart and feeling this lotus flower both outside in your hands. So mudra is really just a gesture that is mimicking something inside of us. So you can let your lotus flower and mudra open and soften, and then feel that mimic inside your heart. And then breathe into the back space of your heart. So as you inhale, breathing in through the front, into the back. And just feeling that support, the universal support behind you. And then as you exhale, just letting any energy of shame, however that might still feel like it's manifesting in your body, maybe it's a disassociation or a numbness. Sometimes it feels like a numbness. And before we can actually get out of shame, sometimes we have to just recognize it and sit in it. And then continue to breathe in and out through your heart. So you're making that deep connection into your heart space. And the heart, the beauty of the heart is that it's infinite and it can hold all energies. Breathing in compassion all the way into the back, and then exhaling your breath all the way out. And then we'll gently release our mudra, open the eyes, and just be aware as you open your eyes, keeping that connection to your heart space. Does that feel different?
Mm.
And then one more practice you can do, and Chris is just going to move over slightly. I have a little room. So these are two practices that I like to use just to bring me into my body. And this one's a solar energy that we're going to connect with. So you can take your hands and rest them on your shoulders. And you're going to inhale the elbows to the left and exhale to the right. So that's going to be the motion. Inhale left, exhale right. And then when you go to the right, you're going to say the mantra Ha. And Ha is the solar mantra. So when you're feeling kind of that low energy that sometimes shame can kind of bring us down and into low self-worth, this this mantra, and we're actually doing a body mudra right now, is going to bring you into more of a luminous energy. Okay? So we'll just try about 10 breaths. It's going to go like this. I'll show you. Inhale, Ha, Ha, Ha. And it's going to come right from your solar plexus. So inhale left, Ha, 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 Ha. One more, Ha. And then coming back to neutral. We'll release our hands into our lap and close your eyes for a moment, just take a moment. And sometimes it can be uncomfortable, even just to feel movement in our body or to speak a sound like Ha. Right? We can even have shame around speaking. So then we'll open our eyes. So there's a couple of takeaways that you can work on in your body. Do you have anything you want to bring in, Caress?
Yeah. So for me, back into the idea of mindfulness is when we go into blame or shame, we have to ask ourselves, what is my lesson in that experience? What am I supposed to learn from this? And as we really just get honest with that, then that can expand into how do I become the best version of me based on that lesson. Best version of me, not the best version of anyone else, just the best version of you.
Thank you, Chris. Everybody is a teacher, right? Everyone is our teacher. Everyone is just showing us aspects of ourselves.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful.
I was noticing a comment, sorry about that one. It said, so true, just ask for what you want. And I feel like that's a lot of what we're having to do is sort of command our energy field and what we want. And we have to do it in our bodies, and we have to do it in our voice and what we're asking for in our lives. Because we may unconsciously be asking for things we don't want to. Right? Like I know I do it all the time.
Right.
I have to catch myself. Like, no.
Right.
Yep. That's so true. All right. Is there anything? I think we're trying to keep it to a certain time. So,
does anyone watching have any questions for us before we close?
Yeah. Are there any questions?
I haven't seen any questions so far, but
for anyone that would like to join us and ask some questions of Allison and C, because there's an open seat if someone would like to come on and have a conversation. No, I don't have my glasses on. Okay, anything that C, you or Allison want to add in closing about the work that you're doing, or anything that you would like to share?
Well, we are doing workshops here in Boulder, and then we'll be expanding out to our community in New Mexico at Hawk Hill.
It's called Hawk Hill Retreat Center, and we're actually just creating it right now. So it's really exciting. It's a beautiful Santa Fe style retreat center on 8 acres, and it backs up to a community that I'm connected with called Hummingbird, and they're a sustainable community, beautiful gardens and farms. So we're hoping to do these retreats where we're really incorporating nature and food and wellness and empowerment, and yeah, just using the land. I feel like there's so much potency in nature, and there's so much teaching that we have not even, I think, tapped into. Well, I just think we have no idea how much teaching that nature offers us, you know? So yeah, we're doing that, and then we're hoping to put together in the next 6 to 8 months a retreat down in Costa Rica and La Osa Peninsula for women. So
to be one with the rainforest and really get grounded.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
And I just wanted to add that I just typed in our website, thewomensnetwork.com, in the comment box here if anyone's watching and wants to know more about the Women's Network. And we do these blabs very regularly, and we always announce them in our newsletter. So if you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can sign up on our website. And I don't know if you ladies have a website you want to put in, but feel free to add it in the comment box.
Okay, great. And just thank you both for what you're doing and what you're offering here to women. I think it's incredible, and what a great offering.
Thank you for creating this collective circle.
Well, I think it's an exciting time to be a woman. I think there's lots of really cool shifts and changes that are happening. So I find it extremely energizing to be part of the changes that are happening for us. So thank you both for showing up. That's a big part of it, right? It's just showing up to do the work. So I think that's another message for women, just to know that the biggest piece is just showing up, right? Their presence and their willingness to be part of this work that's happening on the planet. As I said, exciting times. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I was just gonna say, like, for me to be like up on a screen is not my comfort zone.
Right.
So I just want to speak to the women who are like, afraid to speak out and up, and just say, like, again, like you said, Lois, don't worry about how you're showing up, just show up. And then the rest will come.
We don't have to be perfect.
We don't have to be perfect.
I know, it's like, okay, I really think discomfort is our best friend, right? It's like, oh my God, nothing I do every day, I go, oh my God, really? That's so uncomfortable. So I think I think that's part of the new movement, is realizing that not moving away from the discomfort, but going into it, because it's going to be uncomfortable to change. Change is always uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, showing up and being uncomfortable and not being perfect. It's all good. All right. Thank you both so much. It's been great to talk with you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.